My name is Morgan Jones-King. I'm at the South Carolina Department of Archives and History. Just a reminder that we're going to be using the chat box on the right for questions. We'll save those up until the end. I will be taking note of them, so don't worry, they won't get lost. This is the last in our spring series of webinars for SERI. The fall series will start in September, and more will be coming out on that later this year. In addition to webinars, we also have online educational recordings. The one that is currently available is Managing Digital Content Over Time, and that is available at the link you see on the screen there. All right, our two presenters today are Dorothy Davis. She is the Archival Collections Coordinator at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. She has been with the department since 2013 and previously worked for Ancestry.com. Dorothy holds a Master's in Public History from Middle Tennessee State University, as well as an MLIS from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Currently, she serves on the SERI Steering Committee and SAA's Committee on Ethics and Professional Conduct. Rachel Smith is a collections archivist at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Before joining the ADAH in 2015, she worked at the Tennessee State Library and Archives. She received a Master's in Public History from Middle Tennessee State University in 2013, and she currently serves on the SERI Education and Programming Subcommittee. And with that, I believe we're going to go ahead and turn presenter duties over to Dorothy and Rachel.
Okay, thanks, Morgan. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dorothy. I'll be going first. We want to thank you for joining us. And to get started, I just want to give you some background about my agency's history and organization. The Alabama Department of Archives and History started in 1901 as an independent state agency governed by a Board of Trustees. Our board is self-appointing, and board members are confirmed by the legislature. As required by Alabama state law, I'll also remind you that we are the first state archives. Now that on January 1st, 2017, the department reorganized into 3 divisions: the Archives Division, the Museum Division, and the Administrative Services Division. I want to highlight the 5 sections primarily involved in the grant. Starting with the Archives Division, the Collections section has 7 full-time employees with 2 part-time retired state employees. The Records Management section has 3 full-time employees and 1 full-time grant-funded position. The Digital Assets section has 4 full-time employees and 2 part-time retired state employees. The Reference section has 5 full-time employees, and representing the Administrative Services Division, the IT section has 2 full-time employees. Now let's move on to our history with electronic records. We started working on electronic records in 2000, almost 100 years into our agency's history. Since then, staffing and budget challenges have kept us from having a continuously active electronic records program. We've had a lot of starts and stops along the way, so we were very excited by the grant opportunity from the NHPRC to be able to move past this phase. We proposed working with the governor's office to establish procedures and workflows for the governor's electronic records. We selected the governor's office as our partner agency because we have a continuous run of governor's papers from our territorial period, and we wanted to make sure we continue to provide access to governor's papers no matter what format they come to us in. To accomplish this through the grant, we proposed hiring a project archivist to work primarily with the governor's office as a records liaison to help the governor's staff get things ready to transfer at the end of Governor Robert Bentley's term in 2019. While the project archivist would be working with the governor's staff, collections archivist would process Governor Bob Riley's electronic records, which was our first gubernatorial electronic records transfer. We received Governor Riley's records in 2011 at the end of his two-term administration. So by the end of the grant, we would be able to provide access to Governor Riley's files, receive Governor Bentley's electronic records, and have workflows established for managing electronic records from transfer to access that we could apply in our work with other state agencies. Now that I've reviewed our grant idea, who makes up our current grant team? Today we have 11 primary grant team members, including our Archives Division Director, 3 Records Management Archivists, 4 Collections Archivists, 1 Reference Archivist, 1 Digital Assets Archivist, and our IT Manager. We also have a new Project Archivist who started June 4th, and we have several other staff members who join us as needed for various grant projects. We started the grant on January 1st, 2017. You'll notice that this is the same time as our department reorganization. Our then Project Archivist started in February and began working with the Governor's office staff on an electronic records survey. Then on April 7th, 2017, the Alabama House of Representatives Judiciary Committee released its impeachment investigation report on Governor Robert Bentley. The report addressed allegations that Governor Bentley misused state funds in the course of an alleged affair with one of his top aides. On April 10th, Governor Bentley resigned, and Lieutenant Governor Kay Ivey was sworn in as governor. The next day, a small team of records management and collections archivists started working with the governor's office to transfer both the physical and electronic records for Governor Bentley's administration 20 months earlier than planned. So what was the transition period like? First, I want to acknowledge that the governor's office staff was extremely cooperative through what was a difficult time for many of them. A resignation presents a tricky situation for both sides, and Governor Bentley's staff was both accommodating and appreciative of the help our agency provided to transfer the administration's records. But during this period, the electronic records transfer was delayed due to concerns related to an ongoing investigation by our State Ethics Commission. Although the office file transfer was delayed, we did receive 50 PST files representing 42 staff members from our State Office of Information Technology that maintains all state Office 365 accounts. We also received electronic records from the Office of Rural Development and the Office of Broadband Development, 2 sub-offices that Governor Ivey closed. Now I'll pass over to Rachel to talk about our grant activities.
Yes, so now I'm going to talk about various projects that have been included in this grant. One of our first goals was to start processing our electronic records backlog. Bob Riley was the governor of Alabama from 2003 to 2011. We received his records soon after his administration ended, and it included the first major transmittal of electronic records taken in by ADAH. This collection was 1.87 terabytes, which included office files, emails, Outlook calendars, videos, and photographs. The bulk of the data was from the photographs. These files had very little arrangement and did not follow any naming conventions. Photo files were just image 1, 2, 3, while the office files had inconsistent naming and several subfolders. Previous staff members did some initial survey of these files and experimented with some tools, but this collection was left unprocessed. The project typically was framed as too large of a task for a staff with limited time and limited technical knowledge. We were hesitant to venture into electronic records processing because we did not have all of the solutions and thought it was beyond our capabilities. With our NHPRC funding in 2017, we were able to dedicate our resources to begin processing the Governor Riley files. Our grant team committed ourselves to just getting started and learning as we went along. I began with the office files because it was the smallest group of files with the most familiar format types, like Microsoft Word documents, PowerPoint, Excel spreadsheets, and PDFs. Our team also thought these records had the most value for our researchers. I conducted an item-level review of the files. Typically, our paper government records are processed on the series level with very minimal review, but it was clear this would not translate into a digital environment. I have found electronic records processing to be most similar to working with a manuscripts collection. Instead of a family member dumping everything into a box, instead you are handed a hard drive with file names that make no sense and folders nested endlessly. You must look at all of the pieces to gauge the content and establish an arrangement. I renamed the files with more descriptive information and established a file naming convention. Since we intended to provide online access to these files, I also screened the records for privacy and copyright concerns. I changed the arrangement from staff member-specific folders to office division series, removing unnecessary file levels and redundancy. Of course, I encountered some issues during my processing. For example, the governor's office liked to save reports and articles written by private organizations for their own personal reference. We do not have copyright clearance to provide online access to these materials, so we created a separate folder for these files and kept them to in-house access only. There were several contact lists in this collection. Our team had to decide what should be restricted on these lists, especially since several of the contacts were government officials with publicly available contact information. Since we were using an automated tool for redaction, we ended up restricting all phone numbers because we could not distinguish between a cell and an office number. The collection contained transitory records, including conference travel arrangements and personnel materials. We weeded these files. Typically, we also define drafts as transitory, but the staff time and effort to identify final versions of documents was deemed as too excessive, so we retained all drafts. Throughout this process, we made sure to document our decisions. While I was working on the office files, another team member was reviewing the Riley photographs. At 1.58 terabytes, these files were sizable and numerous. Our limited digital storage space did not allow us to retain all of these photos. More importantly, the initial collection survey showed there was a high number of transitory files and near duplicates in these records. The governor's office staff photographer did no records management on these files and transmitted virtually every photograph taken, even if the photo was not used as a final product in any way. A dozen or more photos of the same event, even from the same camera angle, may have been transferred with only the slightest of variations. Our team decided that item-level processing of the photos, including weeding, should occur. This level of review will decrease the collection's volume and allow us to retain only the photos with permanent value. Through the item-level review, our team established a variety of reasons why a photo could be recommended for weeding. The most common reason was when multiple photos were taken to ensure the best end product. I am guilty of this myself when I am trying to get the perfect shot for Instagram and have 20 pictures of the same thing. The governor's staff photographer did this, had the same practices. If there were only slight variations between the shots, we kept the best one and weeded the rest. In particular, there were high numbers of similar photos of speeches. Our reviewer kept shots that captured Governor Riley's speaking style with facial expressions and gestures. We sought to retain shots that were not unflattering of the subjects, removing images with closed eyes or contorted faces if alternatives existed. Some of our team members were concerned that sometimes images look highly similar but have different people in the background. We have been mindful to retain images of each individual in attendance. The photographer sometimes took test shots or captured images with no identifiable subject or purpose, and these have been removed. If a photograph was edited by the staff photographer, we decided to retain both the unprocessed and processed versions of the image. For a time, the photographer had their camera set to produce both a proprietary RAW format, CR2 in our case, and a JPEG for each image. Our team had to decide which file format we should keep from these duplicates. Ultimately, we chose to retain the raw CR2 for the format's inclusion of additional photo-related data. We then migrated the CR2 files into the more preservation-stable format of TIFF. All of these decisions were documented in our photo weeding memo. You can actually access this memo on our grant projects website, which is under the records management section of the ADH site. It also is linked here on the slide. It has been added to the Resource Center on the COSTA website as well. The memo includes our criteria and actual examples from the Riley collection. In both our office and photograph file processing work, we used automated tools. Here are 4 we've utilized and can recommend. Redacted can identify privacy information in individual documents and replace the content with a restriction notice. It allows you to save both the redacted and unredacted versions of the file. We use this to create redacted copies restricting personal identifying information, including social security numbers and phone numbers. This tool has an annual subscription fee. Our team has used a few different file naming tools, but personally I used File Renamer. This is useful when you want to rename batches of files with repeating information. For example, we made our photograph files in a folder to have the event name and date as the file name plus a sequential number. You can set the parameters for your file name and implement the changes at once. My most valuable tool is Duplicate File Finder, which, as its name suggests, finds duplicate files. It compares files on the bit or hash level to identify multiple copies. It will list these duplicates in groupings with file names, size, date, and file path information for you to compare the versions. You can select which copies you want to delete and it removes the duplicates. This has a small fee after your free trial period. I have used this to weed several of our electronic records collections, even including the files on our own department's drives. If you need to see the differences between drives or media, I have used WinMerge. I was copying our files to our backup server and had some error messages that some files did not transfer. I used this tool to identify which files existed on both servers and which files only existed on our active drive. Thus, I was able to identify the files I needed to retransfer. After I completed processing the office files, I worked on ingesting the collection into our digital preservation system, PRESERVICA. ADH selected PRESERVICA because it is an all-in-one solution allowing us to store, preserve, and provide access to our electronic records. We have limited IT support in-house, so we needed a system that would not require upkeep on our end. We are using PRESERVICA as a cloud-based system, which lowers our storage costs. It allows for active preservation of the files with fixity checks and file format migrations. Most importantly, the system has an integrated public access portal, which allows our researchers to use our Born Digital materials. We began using PRESERVICA in June 2017 to preserve the Riley office files. I ingested the collection into the system and migrated the files to PDFs for preservation and access copies. The system retains both the original format and the migrated manifestation. We launched our public access site in January 2018, thereby opening the Governor Riley Office Files electronic records collection. Our reviewer completed the initial weeding recommendation review of the Riley photograph files at the end of 2017. Our team reviewed those recommendations and implemented the weeding in 2018. We have ingested and migrated the photograph files in PRESERVICA this year, and we plan to open this series this fall. There is a link to our public access site on this slide as well. Another major component to the Governor Riley collection is his office's INTRANET QUORUM, or IQ server. If anyone is unfamiliar with IQ, it is a proprietary database system from Lockheed Martin, now Leidos. It is most commonly used to track constituent services work, like correspondence and phone calls. Governor Riley was a U.S. congressman before becoming governor, and his congressional office used IQ. So he became an early gubernatorial adopter of the system. His office used IQ his entire 2 terms from 2003 until 2011. After he transitioned out of office, we worked with the governor's staff to receive this data. When they had purchased the system, there had been no consideration for how this material could be transferred to the archives. Their contract did not have any stipulations about a data export. The governor's office IT staff member transmitted the entire IQ server to our department in 2014. We were given an administrator's login to use the system, but this was not sustainable. Our own IT staff member then began working with Lockheed Martin to arrange for a data export. Since it was a proprietary system, the company insisted on performing the export themselves. We had to set up a VPN for them to access the server through our firewalls and for them to save the files to a folder. Our department paid Lockheed Martin for this export process. Since there was no data export requirements in the contract, Lockheed Martin performed essentially a data dump. We received the database in 46 individual tables as DAT files and 7 folders containing thousands of attachments. The image here on the left shows one of those DAT files open in Notepad. They provided some documentation about file names and table usage, but this did not have a lot of information about the relationships between the tables. I migrated the DAT files to CSVs to make them more stable and usable. We had a collections archivist join our staff in 2018 who has an IT background. He was able to import the CSVs into Microsoft Access and rebuild the table relationships using the database schema documentation. He developed forms and reports to display the data and recreate the system's functionality. That end product is what you see here on the right. Now that the data was in a usable format, we could begin reviewing the database contents. We discovered that the governor's office had used IQ for numerous functions. Besides constituent correspondence, staff members also tracked event scheduling, board appointments, and case management in the system. The staff was inconsistent with scanning physical correspondence to attach the database entries. They also maintained internal notes about constituents and their concerns. There is a high concentration of personally identifiable information and sensitive case issues. Now that we have completed the rebuilding of this database, our team is still exploring how we want to proceed with the content that it contains as far as processing and access are concerned. As we are making progress on the Governor Riley materials, we received more electronic records from the governor's office. Soon after the Governor Bentley administration change in April 2017, we began working with the Office of Information Technology, or OIT, to receive a transfer of the governor's office email accounts. We asked for them to recover the accounts of every staff member at the end of Bentley's term. In June of that year, we received 50 PST files representing 42 staff member accounts. Some of the larger accounts had been separated into 2 or 3 PST files. I conducted an initial review of these PST files, creating this spreadsheet. I reviewed the email inboxes for the following information: the date range of the emails. Did the staff member use any organizational structure or filing system? Did they save things in folders, or was everything just in their inbox? Did any of the emails have any major security concerns, like personal identifying information or attorney-client privilege material? Was there any evidence this individual resigned during the administration transition, since a lot of staff members would email the staff to announce this news? Did the individual use their account for personal business, like emailing their family members or using their address for various logins? And did they subscribe to mailing lists, such as listservs or national press briefings? This helped me identify which accounts would have messages we needed to restrict or accounts that had a lot of excess that can be deleted. I also was able to generally take stock of the types of emails each account contains. Was this individual sending transitory messages or permanent records? After my review, a work group met to make retention recommendations. Our team has been experimenting with Total Outlook Converter Pro on our wonderful moderator Morgan's recommendation. This tool extracts messages from the PSTs and converts them into individual PDFs. This format will allow our team to begin reviewing and processing these accounts. During the email transfer from OIT, we were also continually in contact with the governor's office about transmitting the Governor Bentley's administration electronic records. Soon after Governor Ivey was sworn in, she disbanded 2 sub-offices, the Office of Rural Development and the Office of Broadband Development, as Dorothy mentioned. Our project archivist worked with the staff members in these disbanded offices and received their digital administrative files in mid-2017. The administration transition also saw changes to the governor-appointed task forces, committees, commissions, and advisory councils, with 18 being disbanded. We worked with our governor's office records liaison to gain information about these groups, which we referred to with the umbrella term of task forces. Most of these entities were made up of members from the state legislature, various state agencies, the university system, and the private sector. So it was initially unclear who was responsible for the record keeping of these groups. The governor's office provided a contact list for the task force leaders, since each group maintained their own files, as we learned. Our project archivist reached out to those leaders to arrange for transmittals. Since these members had various other jobs, it was sometimes challenging for them to locate files related to this specific project. Sometimes we were directed to other members, and sometimes we heard no response at all. After some communication, we received files from 9 entities, or half of the groups. Some task forces submitted just their final report, while others transmitted meeting minutes, summaries, and member lists. Our contacts in the governor's office indicated that they were ready to transfer digital photos and video files. We collaborated with the governor's office IT staff member to prepare this transmittal, since these files were saved on multiple devices within their office. In February 2018, we received 2.5 terabytes of Governor Bentley's administration's photos and videos. We are using the lessons we learned with the Goveror Riley photographs to process this new collection, continuing to implement the leading procedures laid out in our memo. Our grant has helped us to expand our electronic records collections beyond just the governor's office. Our team has developed policies and procedures for records transfers and processing. We now have a numbering system and database to track our collections as they continue to grow. We have established a digital storage plan, which ensures we have 3 copies of the files in separate locations. Setting these foundational elements has allowed us to build up our capacities to handle the ever-increasing amount of digital material. Since it was the first major electronic records transmittal, the Riley collection held most of our staff members' attention. But our team realized that our department had also been passively accepting electronic records on legacy media. These floppies, CDs, and flash drives were typically transferred interfiled with paper materials and thus were never identified. We decided to perform a survey project to gain more control of the devices in our holdings. Our team determined that most of these types of devices would be in our more recent transmittals, since a flash drive would probably not be in a box from the 1930s. So a team member began reviewing the latest accessions and worked backwards to locate and identify the legacy media in our collections. We found 1,954 devices, which included 3 flash drives, 551 floppy disks, and 1,400 CDs of various types. These items were received from 22 different state agencies. Once we had this inventory, we prioritized which devices we wanted transferred onto our servers and have moved the files off the unstable media. We will be wrapping up this media survey project soon and will begin developing processing plans for this newly identified backlog. While we were getting a better grasp on our current electronic records holdings, we also began pursuing new digital records transmittals from other state agencies. The House of Representatives transferred PDFs of the House journals from 1998 through 2017. These files have been processed and are accessible through PRESERVICA. We are now working on processing the Senate journals from the same time period, but there are more legacy file formats we are migrating before making these accessible. In 2018, our records management team decided to target state publications as potential transmittals. Our state agencies must submit an annual records disposition implementation report to ADAH. On this year's report, we asked agencies a series of questions about if they produce state publications, including newsletters or annual reports. Our project archivist then reached out to agencies to facilitate them transferring their publications. This process typically required some clarification for the agencies, like what classified as a state publication, how we only wanted born digital files, and that we were collecting more than just the previous year's materials. We have received materials from 42 state agencies so far, adding 1,168 publications to our collections. These items have been processed and preserved in PRESERVICA. We plan to open these files on our public access site this fall. Our grant project has also focused on partnering with the governor's office to help them develop their electronic records management. If we can help shape the records creation process, we can better facilitate preservation and access of the files in the future. Our grant partnership allowed us to establish our project archivist as a governor's office liaison archivist. At the beginning of the grant, she was introduced to all of the governor's office staff members and was given a workspace in their office. Our team decided she should conduct surveys with the governor's office staff members to gain a better understanding of their current records management practices. She developed questions in advance so her surveys could be consistent. The agency's records liaison sent an email to the staff telling them this survey would be happening, which helped create buy-in for setting up meetings for these discussions. We also were mindful to schedule the survey during the legislative break so staff members would have more time available. We were able to hold 18 meetings with 23 staff members representing every sub-office. Sometimes these were one-on-one discussions, while other times an entire sub-office would meet our project archivist at once. The staff members were also able to dictate how long they wanted the discussion to last, so they ranged from 30 minutes to 1.5 hours. After the meetings, our project archivist would type up her notes and analyze the results. The survey included open-ended questions about job duties, types of documents produced, what systems they were using, where files were saved, email practices, and communication methods. You can see some of the sample questions here. And here are a few key takeaways from these meetings. Files were being saved in multiple places, like shared sub-office drives, individual drives, desktops, and laptops. These files did not have a standard file naming convention. Each individual staff member was setting up their filing structure and naming system. Most staff members were unclear about what they would need to do with their records if they left their job, or about the procedures for transmitting materials to the archives. They also did not report any systematic use of personal email. These surveys were super helpful to hear the records creator's perspective on their job and their records they created. Following the survey meetings, it became clear that we should develop updated guidance documentation for records creators. We had some procedural leaflets written in the early 2000s, so technology has definitely changed a bit since then. These leaflets were also trying to speak to all state agency records creators, so they were very general. We decided it would be much more useful to tailor the documents to address specific issues a particular office would encounter. For example, the press office's document would include information about audio-visual formats, while the administrative office will go more in depth about destruction procedures since most of their records are temporary. We also wanted to reference the Governor's Office Records Disposition Authority, or RDA, identifying the permanently retained record series created within that sub-office. That way, they did not have to refer to the entire RDA to find the information about their sub-office. It would be easier to find just the relevant record series in the tailored guidance document. We have structured these documents as FAQ pages, starting with information about public records obligations, basically answering the question, why should I even care about this? All of the office's guides include advice on topics like file naming, file organization, email use, and shared drive usage, but the actual examples relate to the sub-office's files and workflows. Instead of just showing a general file naming convention, we have included the name of a document created in that office. Our goal is for these documents to be concise and relevant, so they will actually be used by the records creators. The staff members expressed their questions and concerns in the survey meetings, so we are using that information to shape the guidance. For example, the appointments office had several questions about how to handle recommendation letters and background checks, so we are making sure to include our answers in their document. While these documents are still currently in development, we think they will be a very useful tool moving forward. And now I'll hand it back to Dorothy to talk about our current state of the project.
Thanks, Rachel. So what's happening now? 2018 was a gubernatorial election year in Alabama. Governor Kay Ivey defeated Tuscaloosa Mayor Walt Maddox, and Governor Ivey started her first full 4-year term in January 2019. Naturally, for the second half of 2018, the campaign took precedence for the governor's office, and our direct work with them slowed down. At the same time, our project archivist left in May 2018. We hired a new project archivist who started in September 2018 and then left in April 2019. As I mentioned earlier, we have a new project archivist who started on June 4th. With our new project archivist on board, during the remaining 6 months of the grant, we will focus on finalizing the electronic records transfer from Governor Bentley's administration, processing Governor Bentley's photographs and videos, and processing the office files from the Office of Rural Development and the Office of Broadband Development. Now let's review what we've learned through the grant. One of the biggest lessons learned for us is that it can be challenging to have only one partner agency. We designed the grant assuming that we'd be working with one administration through the entire grant. While there's a lot outside your control, I recommend taking some time in your grant design phase to brainstorm some worst-case scenarios for your partner agency and your agency. Think about how you can make progress on your grant objectives, even if there are significant changes in staffing and/or buy-in at either agency. You should also always plan for the possibility of staff departures. With Governor Bentley's resignation and Governor Ivey serving the remainder of his term, our partner agency naturally had a lot of staff turnover. While there were staff departures immediately after the resignation, there were additional departures later in 2017. On our end, we have had 3 project archivists in 13 months. We have also had 1 new records management archivist and 2 new collections archivists come on board in 2018. Also, our long-term IT manager retired in June 2018, and we had a new IT specialist join our department soon after. Another lesson is to do some seeing into your future. Do you see some retirements on the horizon? Do you see some large projects? Spoiler, you see both. We proposed the grant in 2015 and started in 2017. During those 15 months in between, we had an agency reorganization and 2 longtime assistant directors retire at the end of 2016. One of our now retired assistant directors was the primary author of our grant. Are there any expected staffing changes, like a retirement, that might happen during the grant? Also, take some time to think about current and upcoming projects. What projects will compete for your grant team's time? You can't predict everything that might happen, but it can be helpful to have a list of ideas about any staffing changes or things that might compete for time. I also want to highlight that the grant has helped us reshape day-to-day tasks. Our grant team has held weekly meetings Thursday afternoons to talk through that week's grant activities and any issues that have come up during the week. At most meetings, we have 5 sections represented during each meeting, which has greatly improved communications between the sections involved in the grant. The grant has also taught us to just start doing something. It's okay to start where you are. I think with electronic records especially, it can be really tempting to focus on how advanced other states are, but it really only matters where you are today and how you can move forward. If our Fitbits have taught us anything, it's that all the small steps really add up, and then you'll be pleasantly surprised at the progress you've made. Also, to paraphrase from Mr. Disney, keep moving forward, do new things, and let your curiosity lead you down a new path. And here's our contact information, and we'll hand control back over to Morgan.
All right, thank you so much, Dorothy and Rachel. That was quite the ride to sort of see it beginning to end. We've had some questions in the Q&A box. If anyone has further questions, putting them in the Q&A box is fine because the presenters can see them, but the rest of the group cannot. So if you can put further questions in the chat box, that would be great. Dorothy and Rachel, our first question is from Lori at PRESERVICA. Just wondering, as a result of the grant project, have you been able to successfully engage the official photographer to step up his records management practices?
For the biggest challenge with the staff photographer for the governor's office during the grant is that the Governor Bentley's staff photographer did continue serving under the Ivey administration and then left for another state agency. So it's just that turnover. That position has had at least a couple of...
They were also out on medical leave for a while as well.
And yes, so she was also on medical leave, and then when she returned, she then left for another state agency. So just the staff turnover has been the biggest challenge, I think, on that front.
And I will say those guidance documentation that I mentioned, we are focusing, the first one will be on the communication sub-office, which is what the staff photographer is within. So we're providing a lot more guidance about the audiovisual formats for that team.
Okay. Our next question is from Abby. How were email messages reviewed? Did you review them manually, or are you using a tool to actually review them?
So I was doing just a quick review, and so I was just opening the PSTs within my Outlook on my computer. I would just open the PST within my Outlook program and just did a quick look at them.
All right. Our next question is from Brian Thomas. What went into the decision to use a naming convention rather than retaining the original file names?
I think we decided that instead of we were thinking of file name. I did not change the folder names. So folder names of the files were retained, but most of the file names within the folders provided no context or information, and so that's why we created a file naming convention.
Okay. And then another question from Lori. How are you handling metadata schemas in the digital preservation system? Does the governor's office present any unique or special requirements?
So currently, most of our description is provided with those file naming convention with the descriptive file names rather than metadata specifically. We are currently not providing, besides folder names, we have not provided any metadata schema currently.
All right. While we wait on other people to see if they have questions, I have one. I thought the weeding memo was really genius, and I'm wondering how you found, as you went through this project, did you start out intending to document everything because it was a grant project, or did your documentation efforts build and change over the course of the project, and have you found the baby bear's porridge of documentation as you've gone along?
I will say the photo weeding memo, and specifically that documentation, we kind of set that out from the beginning. We did want to create very standard procedures for what was considered available to be weeded. And so that was from the beginning. Our documentation on other things has been bolstered by the grant, but obviously it's still ongoing.
Do you feel like the documentation efforts have changed your process? Like, has it given you a chance to review processes and change things, or not really?
I will say documentation always makes you look at yourself and look at your current practices.
Right. All right, we have another question from Mary Johnson. She says, you indicated that Governor Bentley's office was cooperative, but did you sense any difference in cooperation between his staff and his predecessor's staff given Bentley's resignation?
I wasn't here during the transition from Governor Riley's staff. Governor Bentley's staff during the transition, they were very cooperative. I'm not aware of any difference just from the background information that I have for Governor Riley's transition.
All right. So Rachel and Dorothy, with the grant coming to a close and your lessons learned, what do you think is the most, so you had a couple of takeaways, but what would you say is the one takeaway thing, the most important thing you would want another state that maybe wound up in your position, what would you want them to know?
From my perspective, I really just taking some time to plot out what is upcoming unrelated to the grant. There are a lot of things that we knew beforehand, and when we started January 2017, but it's just once you hit the ground running, it's amazing how easy it is to have things competing for your time. And it's just anything you can do to think through what's upcoming, when you expect certain projects. If you know of a project ahead of time, to just map that out, to kind of have like a parallel schedule. Maybe it's not directly grant related, but it is going to pull away some team members. Anything you can do to help be aware of that going into the grant.
Makes sense. All right, we have a question from Courtney Bailey. With some of the staff being grant funded, do you have a plan for sustainability after the grant ends?
The plan is for the grant funded position to be retained within the department and continue on as just a full-time staff member.
All right. And then we have another question from Lori. As a result of the comprehensive backlog media device survey that you conducted, have you changed any transfer policies or procedures for agencies?
Yeah, great question. So we created procedures. There is more initial review of incoming transmittals from agencies. Our records management staff is now doing more review of the items and performing media separation during transmittal now. So now we should, moving forward, be able to identify all of these objects.
Have you given them lists of preferred things you would like and would not like?
Are you speaking with agencies, like what kind of devices?
Yes.
We have not created those yet, those kind of parameters yet, no.
All right, does anyone have any further questions for Dorothy and Rachel? I have to say, I think y'all did a really great job in this webinar of just comprehensively covering start to finish, and I guess you are close to the finish. We've got a couple comments in the Q&A box. Bravo, excellent work. So thank you both. It's been very educational. All right, if we don't have any further questions, we'll start. Wait, do we? Okay. Thank you. More thank yous. As we're closing out, we just want you to know that when you leave the webinar, you will automatically be taken to an online webinar evaluation. We do appreciate your feedback so that we know how to make these webinars better and so that we can plan future webinars that will meet the needs of the people who are watching them. So please take a few minutes. It shouldn't take too long just to chime in and give us your feedback. Stay connected and informed so you can find the COSA website here, as well as the COSA Twitter handle and the COSA Facebook page. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the fall slate of webinars will be coming in September. That's when they will start, so information on those webinars will come shortly before that, so keep an eye out, and we'll be back in touch and eager to interact with all of you again as time goes on. We have more to share. So thank you again, Dorothy and Rachel. Appreciate y'all sharing your experience with us today and hope we get to meet again with everyone at webinars in the future.